Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, June 2nd. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with Lebanese media reports that Israeli Air Force jets struck 2 targets inside eastern Lebanon near the Syrian border a short time ago. There's been no immediate reaction from Israel. Lebanese sources reported there were several casualties in the attacks, but in a rare move, the Hezbollah terror group issued a statement denying that any of its facilities in the area had been bombed. Sirens were heard across the country this morning as part of a nationwide drill to test the level of preparedness in case of a conventional rocket attack on Israel. School children practiced reaching a safe location, and people at work were instructed to enter the nearest protected area. Another siren is expected later this evening at 7:05. Geared to test family readiness, residents in the south in communities close to the border with Gaza were not required to take part in the drill, as the defense establishment decided they have had enough experience in finding and entering shelters, and that sirens in the area could trigger unnecessary tensions. Today's simulation, conducted by the Home Front, is part of a 5-day exercise called Turning Point 15. An Army spokesman said the drill provides an opportunity to prepare the public for emergencies, examine the various systems, as well as inter-organizational coordination. The IDF stressed it helps improve preparedness and emergency response to better defend the home front. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has returned to Boston for surgery on his broken leg, as U.S. officials insisted his injury would not hinder his participation in nuclear negotiations with Iran. With an end-of-June deadline for the Iranian deal fast approaching, officials said the 71-year-old Kerry is expected to have surgery in the coming days on his right femur, which he fractured Sunday in a bicycle accident. This has led to speculation that his recovery would be lengthy and prevent him from being as involved in the Iran negotiations as he has been over the past 2 years. The State Department sought to tamper down such suggestions.
Secretary Kerry's main focus for the month of June remains squarely on the Iran negotiations. I want to be very clear about this. His injury does not change that. He and the entire team are absolutely committed to the same timetable and are working toward June 30th as the deadline for these talks. That he will be actively engaged in these negotiations on the timetable this month that we have talked about. Now, what that looks like, I just don't have more details. He needs to have the operation, and then his doctors will discuss with him what the recovery will look like.
The U.S.-led coalition met today in Paris to discuss their strategy to take on the Islamic State following the fall of Ramadi and Palmyra. Alexander Jen has the details.
In a cry for help, Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi blames the international coalition for a lack of support on the ground and in the air in the fight against ISIS. As representatives from over 20 countries convene to discuss anti-Islamic State tactics, Abadi complains of insufficient intelligence and surveillance, lack of weapons, and the inability to purchase arms easily. Furthermore, he calls upon the coalition to view ISIS as a global problem, as their terrorists are recruited from all over, including Europe, the United States, the Gulf, and Saudi Arabia. Abadi claims this is a failure on the part of the world. The talks are set to focus on how to retake key territories from Islamic State militants. The fall of Ramadi, which is the capital of the Anbar province, was the most recent significant blow to the U.S.-led coalition. The intention is to urge Abadi to enhance Iraq's political strategy and battle the Islamic terrorists on social, economic, and religious fronts. The international community believes attacking ISIS with more than military might would help to curb their imminent threat. Additionally, the allies argue that the Iraq government must be more inclusive of the Sunni minority, with plans to encourage Abadi to make more of an effort to recruit Sunni tribes to join the fight. Though Abadi has reasonable fears of further inflaming the sectarian conflict in Iraq with the involvement of the Sunnis, the coalition insists a stronger anti-ISIS offensive outweighs those perceived fears. But Abadi assured that inclusion plans were on track and rejected the notion that Iraq wasn't doing enough on the political front, denying accusations from the coalition. Though U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is not in attendance due to a bicycle accident in Geneva, he is remotely participating from Boston, where he is in recovery. Instead, Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken is representing the United States at the summit. Alexandra Jen for IBA News.
Hamas forces have killed an Islamic State supporter, the first fatality since Gaza's Islamic rulers launched a crackdown on the more radical group months ago. A Hamas spokesman said that a 27-year-old man died during an attempt to arrest him, adding that the man refused to surrender, then opened fire at Hamas forces and planted explosives in the house where he was holed up. The death comes hours after Islamic State supporters gave Hamas a 48-hour ultimatum to end the crackdown and release dozens of suspected IS loyalists rounded up in recent months. Hamas blames local Islamic State loyalists for a recent string of small explosions that have targeted Hamas security posts. Israel has accused a UN committee that oversees non-governmental organizations of granting UN accreditation to an association linked to Hamas. Israel's mission to the United Nations condemned the decision by the 19-member UN Committee on NGOs which approved the application of the Palestinian Return Center, an organization based in Britain that it says promotes anti-Israel propaganda in Europe. Official UN status as an NGO gives group access to UN premises and opportunities to attend or observe many events and conferences at United Nations sites worldwide. Israel's UN ambassador Ron Prosser said today, until today, the UN has given Hamas discounts and let it strengthen its activities. Now the UN went one step further and gave Hamas a welcoming celebration at its main entrance, allowing it to be a full participant. According to this script, one day we may find Hezbollah sitting at the Security Council and ISIS voting at the Human Rights Council. This is the peak season for the UN's theater of the absurd. Meanwhile, France reportedly intends to submit to the Security Council a resolution that would set a time frame for the creation of a Palestinian state. France apparently intends to submit the resolution sometime after the June 30th deadline for concluding nuclear talks with Iran, with the intention of bringing it to a vote during the General Assembly session in New York in September. The U.S. State Department was asked yesterday about this resolution.
We've made no decisions with respect to action at the UN, and certainly not on a hypothetical resolution. We are carefully considering our future engagement at the UN if and when we reach that point to determine how to most effectively advance the objective I think we all share for a negotiated two-state solution. So we're continuing to work with our partners, including the French, but at this point, again, no decisions have been made with respect to action at the UN.
65 years after it shut down, the legendary Valley train is getting back on track. The new rail line will link Haifa with Beit Sha'an through the Jezreel Valley and later connect to Jordan. IBA's Ari O'Sullivan set out to check on the progress of the endeavor and filed this report.
Someone's been working on the railway. The Transportation Ministry, through the Nativ Israel Company, are running full steam ahead to lay down the steel rail lines for the new route linking Haifa with Beit Sha'an. It'll serve as an economic boost to the people of the Jezreel Valley and a link with Jordan. But this is not just another railway line in the country. This is the resurrection of the legendary Valley train that was built by the Turks over 100 years ago and helped transform the Lower Galilee into a hub of Jewish settlement. The steam engines once chugged along the valley, stopping at the many stone stations along the way, Kfar Yoshua, Afula, Beit Sha'an, all the way to Tzemach and ultimately Damascus. But steam gave way to buses and trucks, and by 1950, the Valley train faded away into history. About a decade ago, the Israel Society for the Preservation of Heritage Sites began restoring the old stations.
The preservation started in 1996, and we think that to tell this important story, the story is by the building that you can see, and the museum that showed the movie, the history movie, all together make the place and the story very, very important.
The Jezreel Valley was the womb of early Zionism. It was here that the idea of kibbutz was formed, of social collectiveness, of returning to the land. And the Valley train was the lifeline to those settlements that lived here. Now, after the state was formed, the lifeline was paved over. Now, all these years later, a modern railway is being paved, and it's hoped that it will bring back prosperity to the valley. They're laying about 500 meters a day, and 5 new stations like this one at Kfar Yoshua are being built. It'll cross the country, linking Haifa through the Jezreel Valley, past Afula, all the way to Beit Sha'an. The plans call for the railway line to continue to Jordan over the Sheikh Hussein Bridge and on to Irbid, thus providing the Hashemite kingdom with access to a Mediterranean port. Officials say once the freight trains start running, it'll significantly reduce the number of trucks hauling goods to and from Jordan.
It's no doubt about it. Economic, all the stuff they get from Jordan, the stuff that we get from Iraq, and even now from Turkish, by Jordan, will now take place very important to port of Haifa, by the railway, the new railway one.
At a cost of some 4 billion shekels, the new line will be a little faster than the old steam engines, zipping by at over 160 kilometers an hour. But no matter how fast it'll go, when it finally opens in early 2017, it will also be ushering back a bygone era when it rides its carpets made of steel on its Valley Odyssey. Ariel Sullivan for IBA News.
A double homicide in the city of Lod. A couple in their 30s was stabbed to death in their apartment yesterday, apparently by the woman's ex-husband. The victims were identified as Victoria Steingerbert and her partner Morris Samashvili. The suspect, Jonathan Steingerbert, tried to commit suicide immediately after the attack, was arrested and hospitalized in serious but stable condition. Police suspect the murder followed a dispute between the assailant and the female victim. The divorced couple had a history of domestic violence, and the woman had previously filed complaints of physical abuse against the suspect. Steingerbert managed to show up for a hearing on the extension of his remand today with his head wrapped in bandages. He expressed remorse, apologizing to his daughter, a soldier in the army. Police suspect he was intoxicated when committing the murder. The carnage on the nation's roads continues. A woman and her 2 children, aged 6 and 9, were killed last night in a head-on collision between their vehicle and a minibus traveling along road number 96 near Kibbutz El Rom in the Golan Heights. The family's father and another 3-year-old child were seriously wounded and were evacuated by helicopter to a nearby hospital. According to an initial investigation, the family car suddenly swerved into the opposite direction, colliding with the minibus. The driver of the minibus suffered light injuries. The Rishon LeZion Magistrates Court today extended by 14 days the remand of alleged underworld kingpin Avi Rochen, suspected of involvement in a series of murders related to the ongoing investigation in the 512 underworld crime case. The court did release Moshe Malul from questioning, who is already convicted for drug offenses. Malul will continue serving his sentence at the Ayalon jail. Earlier this week, the court extended the remand of 40 other crime world figures arrested in connection to the case. Turning to the U.S. presidential race, and South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has opened his campaign for the Republican nomination. He is entering a crowded field and trying to distinguish himself from a multitude of Republican opponents. Having won his 3rd term last November, Graham is a prominent Senate voice in seeking a more muscular foreign policy. Speaking to supporters yesterday in the small town of Central, where he grew up, Graham cast the threats facing the United States in particularly dark terms, especially from Iran and radical Islam.
Have more safe havens, more money, more capability, and more weapons to strike our homeland than any time since 9/11. They are large, they are rich, they're entrenched. The world is exploding in terror and violence. But the biggest threat of all is the nuclear ambitions of the radical Islamists who control Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no moderates in Iran running their government. With Israel, we share values, we share democracy, and our friendship is unbreakable. To our friends in Israel, I will never abandon you.
Israeli authorities allowed Nazi mastermind Adolf Eichmann a visit from his wife, Vera, 2 months before he became the only person ever executed by the state in 1962. Information published by the Israel State Archives has revealed. The archive produced records of Vera Eichmann's visit to the Ramla prison and logs of her spending 80 minutes with her husband there. Israel permitted the visit as a humanitarian gesture. Government officials at the time said there was no point in preventing the visit if doing so could hurt the state's reputation, and allowing it would not harm the state. However, they did keep the visit secret. Eichmann was captured in Argentina in 1960 in a Mossad operation. The following year, he was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity in a landmark trial and was hanged in 1962. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled in favor of a Muslim woman who did not get hired after she showed up to a job interview with clothing retailer Abercrombie & Fitch wearing a black headscarf. The justices said that employers generally have to accommodate job applicants and employees with religious needs if the employer at least has an idea that such accommodation is necessary. The headscarf, or hijab, violated the company's strict dress code for employees who work in its retail stores. Job applicant Samantha Eloff was 17 when she interviewed for a sales staff position at an Abercrombie kids store in a shopping mall in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 2008. She impressed the assistant store manager with whom she met, but her application faltered over her headscarf because it conflicted with the company's look policy, a code derived from Abercrombie's focus on what it calls East Coast collegiate or preppy style. Abercrombie has since changed its policy on headscarves and has settled similar lawsuits elsewhere. A delegation of legislators from Missouri visited Israel this past week in order to strengthen trade opportunities for their state, as they explained to IBA's Aaron Viner.
Senator?
Well, you know, you're a big partner with Missouri when it comes to science and trade. We've over nearly $1 billion in trade since 1996 between Missouri and Israel.
What kind of trade?
Sigma Aldrich, chemical, manufacturing, all kinds of trade. And this is where it's happening. From what we've seen on our tour, it's been really, really exciting. The places we've been, the Technion and Sigma Aldrich. I really enjoyed going to Sigma Aldrich because they're based in St. Louis, where I'm from. So that was really an eye-opener for me. And some of the things we've seen, we can relate to some of the heart surgeries that or not the surgeries, but the techniques that we've seen. Mm-hmm. They're doing it less than a mile from my house. And when we got there, somebody said, oh, when will this be on the market? It's on the market, and it came from here, and they're using it in my neighborhood just down the street. And it so happened that one of the individuals on the tour had been a beneficiary of it.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
So you hoping to foster stronger ties and increase imports, increase trade?
Yeah, I think to follow up on what the senator said, you know, we've been working for the last couple of years to establish a trade office for Missouri and Israel, and it's something that we put in our state's budget last year. There were some funding shortfalls on the revenue side on the state budget, and but we put that back in again this year, and are hopeful that we'll be able to establish that connection for Missouri and Israel, so that we can continue to foster that relationship on a trade from a trade perspective with Israel and Missouri. So.
I understand it's the first time that both of you have been here to the country. What kind of an impression are you taking home with you?
Much different impression than what I came with.
The same. It's one of those things. I think this is an important trip for us on a trade level, but also from an understanding of the Israeli culture and what it's actually like here. Because I think that sometimes people just hear the bad things. And this is a beautiful country, and the people are very nice, and I think we've both really enjoyed our time here so far.
And you, Senator?
The hospitality has been phenomenal. And as you and I talked before, we only see what's on the news, and it becomes a news item. But there's people living in the middle of that news story every day over here, and the kids here, they're no different than the kids I'm raising at home. You see them walking with their Walkmans in their ears, and they're texting walking down the street, and like everybody else all across the world, they're not looking up and bumping into each other. The only difference is the zip code or the geography.
We're a lot more alike than different.
A lot more alike than different.
So what kind of ideas are you getting while you've been here that you think will translate well back home?
There's an interesting partnership between the government and the private sector here, and it's something that I think has been beneficial for Israel, because one thing that's kind of different here than you see back home is that failure in business, I mean, people are willing to try things and take bigger risks here, and failure is just something that is more acceptable to the people who are trying here, I think. And I think that's been beneficial for Israel as far as economically goes and as far as it relates to their international trade.
In local money matters, the shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading, while shares were also mixed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Here are the late afternoon numbers. Another slight rise in temperatures is predicted tomorrow. Here are the highs and lows for the next 24 hours. And that's all for this newscast. Aaron Viner will be here tomorrow with more news from Israel and abroad. Until then, I'm Laura Cornfield wishing you a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.